Hello everyone, welcome back to the podcast, and this time it's part 2 of our discussion on the podcast, and once again joined by JR Southall. JR, welcome back. Hello. Exactly, yes, so we're doing an audio only version and obviously a YouTube version, so you can watch us or listen to us as you see fit. So last time we sort of started discussing because we went on for a lot longer than we anticipated, hence part 2 today. So we started talking about sort of listeners and view, sort of listener interactions and everything. And so this time we were sort of going to kick off and sort of like downloads, really, because it can be, how can I put it?
It can be a bit disheartening, can't it?
It can take you down a bit of a dark path. As you get a bit, I think, it can lead to you being a bit paranoid about why aren't people listening to me?
Well, but here's the thing. Because you remember I used to podcast on the Blue Box podcast, yes. Starburst magazine, and obviously that was on the Starburst website, and it came with a certain amount of sort of attention already. And then when I split from Starburst and started our own, obviously we were starting from scratch and we didn't know how many people we'd bring over. And I remember at the time, and this was 5 or 6 years ago now, I wish I could remember, I'm terrible for these things. Let's say it was about 5 years ago. I remember at the time I thought to myself, I don't know how many listeners we should be getting. Maybe I should look this up and we can find out whether we're doing all right.
Yeah.
And this was literally as we were starting. And so, our downloads were like 0. Our first episode was about 70 downloads in the first week or something, which isn't terrible, I suppose. But so I looked it up and I did find like this list of statistics, which was a weird list. It was like in 2 days, you should get X, and that means you'd be the average. So somebody somewhere had input a load of information about a load of podcasts and they'd come up with these averages, and these are mean averages. So I guess the way it worked, and this was 5 years ago, remember, and in the last 5 years, as we sort of mentioned last time, there's been a revolution in podcasting in the last sort of 5 years, I think. Absolutely. And it has mostly been in the last 5 years too, I think. Obviously it started before then, but I think in the last 5 years it's really ramped up. But at the time, I remember reading that if you got about 200 podcast downloads in your first, I think it was month, it might have been week actually, it said that's about bang on average. So I think, actually maybe 200 in the first month would be bang on average. And the way I understood that, because even then there were a few that were the big boys. So let's say 5% of all podcasts are the big boys. And so if average is 200, those might be getting, let's say, 10,000 downloads, which meant that below the 200 threshold, you probably had 90% of podcasts were below the sort of 200 downloads in a month threshold.
Yeah.
And so I figured, because we fairly quickly got to 200 downloads per month per episode. And so I quickly realized that we were doing okay.
Yeah.
We were sort of not meant, this was how I rationalized it, but I figured we're probably sort of in the top sort of 10% of podcasts, which means we were sort of like right at the bottom of 10%, but we were doing okay, basically. And so before we were doing, and so I've always kept it in my head that actually the threshold for doing really well on podcasts is like a much lower number than you would ever think it would be. I would imagine, considering that a podcast goes out globally, I'd imagine that if you're hosting a podcast, you would probably expect to get thousands of listeners. Yeah. But the truth is, there are multiple thousands of podcasts for people to listen to. And most people are going to, my own experiences, I like to listen to, as we mentioned, sort of news and current affairs.
Yeah.
So I listen to ones from the BBC. I listen to the ones that actually, it turns out, are sponsored by Gary Lineker. I didn't know this, the news agents. I didn't realise they had this connection with Gary Lineker, but it's all sort of come out in the last sort of couple of weeks.
Exactly. Yeah.
But these are all the big boys that get thousands upon thousands upon thousands of downloads. And actually, everybody else is in the minnows. Everybody else is amongst the minnows. And so remembering how heartened I was to find out how few downloads you have to achieve to get into that sort of top 10%. I've not kept an eye on it, but from time to time I've gone back and looked, and of course the numbers keep going down, because as the number of podcasts that you can listen to goes up, the number of average downloads to get to the average goes down. And as I mentioned, this sort of revolution in podcasting that's happened in the last few years, where all the big boys have come in and taken increasingly bigger pieces of the pie, the numbers are... So I looked up something a couple of weeks ago, just before we sort of decided to record, and I didn't look it up because we were about to record. Actually, I looked it up just before we sort of said we would, but I showed it to you. And
yeah,
so these are the figures I found, and this is on a place on the internet called a podcast host, and clearly they've done some maths, and so this is quite interesting stuff. And even this was updated in January of 2023, but this is an American website.
Yeah.
And the thing about American podcasts, and when I say American, I mean sort of North American, so Canadian and States podcasts against UK podcasts, is despite the fact that podcasting is global, it's actually a lot less global than you think. UK podcasts mostly appeal to UK listeners. North American podcasts mostly appeal to North American listeners. And not obviously, not exclusively, but British. If I'm listening to a podcast, I quite like to hear a British voice. Not because I like the British accent, but because that person will be talking in a way that I sort of culturally identify with.
Exactly. Yeah.
And about stuff that I know. There's sort of the things that they sort of relate to in this sort of ephemera of the conversation will be things I have experience of. So bearing in mind, this is American. And so actually for UK podcasts like yours and mine, the numbers would actually be lower still than this.
Yeah.
It says if you get within 7 days of release more than 30 downloads, you're in the top 50% of all podcasts. 30 downloads.
30 downloads. Now that is phenomenally low, isn't it? This is per episode as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's calculated. Yeah. That's amazing, because it's interesting what you said about you were looking at, initially you were looking at, what download figures you were getting, and you were sort of thinking, okay, we're doing quite well with about the 200 per episode. We are getting nowhere near that at all.
Oh, really?
Really, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And I've yet to figure out why that is. Maybe just because we're not very good. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it seems to take a long time to sort of we sort of peak. We sort of have the overnights. It could be sometimes it sits at under 100. Sometimes it might just go over 100, right. and then it just tails off. Until I do the next one again. So that's the sort of average we're getting. I'd say is round about between 95 to 100 downloads per episode in the first instance, kind of thing.
Yeah. But then it does go up a bit across the week, right?
It does. But yeah, I think it also depends on what. Because interesting actually, the hosting site we use is Libsyn.
Yeah.
A very popular, very popular hosting
too.
Yeah. And what I like about that, they actually tell you what country you get your downloads from. So yes, predominantly it's the UK. So it's the UK's at the top. Next is the United States.
Yes.
And then it just sort of trickles down into some places. And right at the bottom, which amazed me, Tonga.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that map obviously changes from time to time anyway.
It does,
so
but
I look at it every now and again just out of curiosity, and it'd be
I do as well. Yeah.
UAE 2 downloads, Philippines 3 downloads, things like that, and it's like somebody in the Philippines has downloaded 3. Well, I mean, it could be 3 people in the Philippines have downloaded one of our episodes each, or somebody there has downloaded 3 episodes, and you do think, why did this stop at 3?
Yeah, exactly. What? I do think though I think you get people will tune into a particular episode depending on what the topic is.
Absolutely.
I think the The biggest things we get is if when, obviously, because we are predominantly a Doctor Who podcast, and if Doctor Who's on the telly and we're reviewing episodes that have just aired, then that's when we tend to get, that's our biggest sort of, download figures.
Absolutely.
And then it's in between those times when it's not on the television, or there's been no big announcements like there's a new Doctor or even a new showrunner, which weirdly enough seems to make the news just as much as a new actor being cast in the role. That they tend to be like our biggest sort of hitters, really. But in between then, it's a little bit hit and miss. And I think it does depend on what you're talking about. It seems to attract listeners in. I think it was also, do you think also marketing, how you sort of promote your podcast goes into a lot of that as well?
It must do, but I don't really understand how it works, if I'm going to be completely honest. I'm an old dinosaur.
Yeah.
I do hashtag our stuff from time to time, but that seems to make no difference. There are obviously things you can do in the metadata. I have no idea how that works. I have no idea what really to do.
No, I think we'll come on to that mystery when we get on to how we diversified it shortly, actually, because I think when you're on YouTube, metadata apparently means a lot on getting noticed. I no idea.
This is like a lot of things. It was about word of mouth, really, wasn't it?
It was initially. I mean, when we started back in 2011, I think Doctor Who was massively popular then, and obviously with any show or anything, it has its peaks and troughs. And I think for the last few years, it's in a bit of a. I felt it's been in a bit of a trough, and the interest has sort of dwindled a little bit. And I think that's to do because it's not. I don't know. Was it a pin just to the fans, not like the general audience?
I think actually, if you know where to look, the last few years has had a lot. In some parts of the internet, the last few years has generated a lot more interest than it did before, and in other parts it hasn't. And if you know where to look, you can find it, and it's like, oh God, I didn't realise this was happening. The Jodie Whittaker thing, there has been a massive amount of people. Now, the people who listen to our podcast probably won't believe this, but if you somewhere on the internet, you will find a massive amount of sort of real excitement about everything that's happened with the Jodie Whittaker Doctor and the last sort of few years with Chris Chibnall and with hence all the sort of Thasmin stuff. You and I, amongst the people that we follow on Twitter, probably have hardly seen anything about Thasmin at all. Thasmin, as they call it.
Well, no, I've seen it.
But you've probably seen it like a little bit. But if you click on sort of the Thasmin hashtag and then follow the hashtag and then follow that into other conversations, you discover that there's an entirely different world, a million miles away from the sort of middle-aged white bloke world, where actually the Jodie Whittaker Doctor and the Chris Chibnall era has really hit home.
Yeah.
But that just goes to illustrate how we sit in one bubble and those fans sit in another bubble and trying to sort of cross between the bubbles. And so going back to the subject of how you sort of put your podcast across or whatever, we're just hitting a tiny little bubble over here in this corner of the internet, and the rest of the internet is entirely sort of undisturbed by us altogether, really, aren't they?
It's true. Actually, I'll come back to your point about the middle-aged white man, which we both most certainly are.
Yeah, exactly.
And obviously, sort of, I think when we started, that's basically what fandom, particularly in Doctor Who circles, which I sort of predominantly sit in. That's all it was, really, wasn't it? Now, I say that I think that's probably more for the UK, because having been to, say, like North American cons, say like Gallifrey 1, which was amazing, because I think I've been to cons over, and it is predominantly sort of like white guys in their Doctor Who t-shirts, but over in the States, it's massive. There's people from a very broad spectrum. There always has been, really, a very broad spectrum. People cosplaying, and you've got like back then you had like the Femme Doctor stuff, so they would you have women dressing up as Peter Davison, but they'd sort of feminize it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was a massive thing, and it must admit, it caught me by surprise, really, just how massive it was, to be honest. You had 3,000 people crammed into that con of all across all spectrums. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. So, do you think now in the UK that sort of that aspect of the white middle-aged guy being into any kind of fandom, whether it's Doctor Who, Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever,
I reckon.
do you think that's dwindled, or we've been pushed to the side? Not pushed to the side, but it's just sort of.
I think it's still. No, I tell you what's happened. Oh, I guess this is how I think of it. Is what's happened is Doctor Who in the UK was a kids program that we watched as kids, and the boys loved it, and the girls went off and did something else. By and large, obviously, I'm generalising horrendously.
Yeah.
But by and large, when we were kids, the boys loved it, and the girls weren't that fussed. I mean, some were, but by and large, they weren't that fussed.
Yeah.
In America, Doctor Who wasn't broadcast for kids. It was on the public service broadcasting. Yeah. So instead of it being kids who found Doctor Who, clearly, obviously, a lot of kids did find Doctor Who. But instead of sort of more or less exclusively, like it was in the UK, it being that you found Doctor Who as a kid, in America, you could find Doctor Who as a grown-up. So Doctor Who appealed slightly more to people who weren't interested in mainstream television so much.
Yeah.
So Doctor Who was for people who liked stuff that was kind of slightly off center, slightly something a bit like weird or different or whatever. Like we might find the Twilight Zone over here in the UK. In America, the Twilight Zone is probably like, sort of mainstream programming.
Yeah.
Over here in the UK, the Twilight Zone, or Lost even. Lost in the UK was on BBC Two. And although it was a big hit on BBC Two, it was a big hit for BBC Two. It wasn't a big hit. It wasn't getting audiences of like 8 million in the UK. It was getting like 750,000 or something.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's just that the 750,000 were all talking about it. So Lost became a cult hit over here, where it was a mainstream hit in the UK, and vice versa. Doctor Who is a mainstream hit here, and it's a cult hit in the UK. So I think we come into it as kids in the UK, and then predominantly boys, like I say. So the Doctor Who audience ages into predominantly white, middle-aged men who got into Doctor Who in the 1960s or 70s when we were all kids. And I think that's the difference, because in America, it's not just kids, and therefore, because of sort of the way your tastes are when you're that age, predominantly boys, in America there's much more of a gender mix.
Yeah.
And also there's much more of I think Doctor Who fans in the UK, because it was a mainstream program, although it takes a certain kind of person to become a fan, I don't think that a lot of the fans of Doctor Who are in the UK are the same kind of cult fandom as you might have in America. So in America, I think it probably appealed more to the type of person who'd be interested in dressing up, or I don't know, in order to sort of expand this into other fandoms, learning Klingon, or sort of like diving deep into sort of the Star Wars expanded universe. Over here, a lot of Doctor Who fans were just kind of people who like mainstream telly, but like particularly latched onto this one. I kind of think of myself as that, because I'm not really into sort of expanded universe stuff and all that kind of thing.
No, me neither.
Yeah,
I think that's why the whole the Thasmin thing, not to say left me cold. I didn't quite understand it, because I've never been into that whole shipping characters thing, because that's been going on for donkey's years across lots of different shows, really. Sort of, they'll people ship characters and write their own
50
novels.
Shades of Grey.
Yes, exactly. So, so it's not really my cup of tea, really. But I mean, that's fine. I think that if that's what you get out of fandom, then fine, really. I don't think there's any problem with it, to be honest.
Well, that's what Love and Monsters was about, isn't it? It was like, you be the fan that you want to be, and who cares really what everybody else says and does.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's for me. It's not really up for question, to be honest. But I think when it comes to sort of like get back on the subject of podcasting again.
I can go back to those numbers, by the way. We should go back to those in a minute.
We should do actually. Yeah, because I think when I started, I think we said last time when in part one of this conversation, we said there were so many podcasts all just popping up out of nowhere at the time, and it was really people of our age group and ethnicity as well, really. And it's just sort of fallen by the wayside. And I think now for me, if I was to stop podcasting, and again it comes back to the whole download thing. You look at it, and as you say, you get disheartened by it, and I think it can be unhealthy if you're continually checking your download figures all the time. And it just comes back, if you enjoy doing it, just carry on doing it.
I've got to say, I keep a record of ours. Mind you, I do that because I have that kind of a brain who likes to keep a record of things, and I started it, and then once you've started it, it's like, oh, it's impossible to stop. But I've got to be honest, our numbers went, for that first month, our numbers went from 0 up to a certain, and then over the years they've never gone up any further. So over the last 5 years, our figures, basically they've not really gone down a lot. They've gone down a little bit, as the sort of number of podcasts out there has expanded. They've not gone down in a crazy amount, but they've certainly not gone up.
No. I think, you know, as I was about to say, there's been occasion I thought, oh, do we want to continue doing this? Is it worth it? But I thought I think after all this time, if I stopped, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. I think really it's now become part of my life, really. And even when there's times where I'm sort of not recording something or other, my wife turns around, and says, well, aren't you podcasting this week? It's sort of, we've all kind of got used to it now, but I certainly didn't intend on carrying on for this long. I'm surprised I have done. And we do have a hardcore listenership who's stuck with us over the years, which I'm forever grateful to. I really am. Really, people do listen to us, and I think the weird thing is it's actually other podcasters. It's something Paul and I have discussed previously, and it's always been what we've noticed. It's not sort of like general fans, really. It's other podcasters who have listened to us. Have you found the same, or have you got more of a broader audience than us?
I think it's slightly broader because of what we do, and I guess we'll get into that in a minute, and also because of where we came from, because having started with the Starburst magazine website, I think that gave us a broader audience to start with, and obviously when we moved, those who knew where we were and what we'd moved to came along too. So we probably have a slightly broader, but a lot of podcasters, because I think that's the thing. If you do podcast, then your chances are, well, unless you're one of these BBC people or whatever at the top end, but if you do podcast, chances are you're into podcasts, so you'll listen to a fair few during the week. So you probably find actually that the number of podcasts who listen to you, the number of podcasters who listen to you, probably only makes up about 25% of your listenership or something at most. But they're the ones who get in touch, and so they're the ones who you see.
Exactly. They're probably more tend to be more I could put more sort of vocal, or
like a community.
Yes, exactly. It really is a community. I think the other thing is as well, really, so obviously you I think where I found most podcasts at the time was all through iTunes, as it then was, or Apple Podcasts as it is now. And I think it's that thing where you first see your podcast appear, when your first episode appears and it's there to download. It's sort of, wow, we're on iTunes, amazing. And I think and then when you I think we said last week, the odd occasion where we've troubled. It used to be the top 300 at the time.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and it's now 200, and I think the highest we ever got was 54. And somebody brought it to our attention. Said you're 54, and it was only in the UK chart, not in anywhere else. But I thought, wow, that's amazing. We quickly disappeared again. But that's one thing I cannot, for the life of me, get to the bottom of the iTunes algorithms, how they calculate chart positions, because there was a podcast in there which I know hadn't produced any content for at that time for the last 3 to 4 years, and it was still in the charts. Wow. And for the life of me, I could not figure out how the hell they calculate that. Chart positions, no idea. Is it metadata or?
I don't know. It's certainly not just downloads.
No, it's not. I know for a fact it's not downloads.
Yeah, it's weird. But
beyond that, I do not know. It's really
I don't know.
Strange.
I've never really looked into it. I I've got to say, over the years, I've barely ever really looked at those charts, and I certainly don't look anymore.
No, I don't. So I know we're not in this.
Yeah. But even back in the day, I never really looked very much. I didn't even look far enough to realise there was a UK and a world. And I didn't realise it was top 300 either. I thought it was top 100. So that's about as far as I got.
Yeah. Well, they also used to do an audio chart and a video chart as well. And again, it wasn't picked up from YouTube. It's if you had video content on your normal RSS feed, it would pick up on that. And then when, again, the little segue here, when I started to diversify into the world of YouTube, I always used to put them up onto our RSS feed as well. And obviously I was having more success there than I did on YouTube, because at that time when they did the video charts, I was in the top 10 on the video charts then. Yeah. And again, quickly went out again. But now they don't do that. There is no video chart now, which I don't know why. I think it's when they started changing it just to Apple Podcasts, and it all got split into separate entities. But
the thing about those charts as well is they're like updated. Instead of it's not a weekly chart, it's like a 6-hourly chart or something.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So, and like the Amazon charts as well for books and stuff are updated every few hours. So I mean, people often say, "Oh, I'm in the top 10," or "Oh, I'm at number 1 in the chart," and you think, and they say, "Oh, I'm at number 1 in the chart for the week," and I'm like, "No, you're not. You're at number 1 in the chart for like a 6-hour period on Friday."
Yeah, and then you're gone again. Yeah. It's a very, very cutthroat, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, it means a lot more people get to say they did well in the charts.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it sort of diminishes what the charts really means, I think.
Well, I think it does. I think that's the same with anything, though, isn't it? I mean, like coming back to those statistics you had about what constitutes getting into that sort of top 10 or whatever it was of down to sort of like of chart positions. It's the same with like the music industry as well now. I mean, obviously, it was all generated by sales of singles in going back to the old days. Nobody buys singles anymore. It's just all downloads, and they had to adapt. I mean, but even if you look at that now, it's sort of like the amount of people can download content, and practically everybody can do that across the,
well, it's playlists as well,
yeah.
So,
but you look at the download figures; it's not a lot really that can get them to number 1 now.
And it's because it's playlists. I think a lot of it is less to do with what people are really interested in than they've just stuck a playlist on, and so all the 15 songs or whatever on that playlist all get counted equally with one another. So a lot of it's sort of genericized anyway to a degree.
It is, yeah, I agree. It's
and of course, the other thing about the pop charts, while we're on this tangent, is if you download or listen to a playlist of 15 or 20 songs in a particular style, R&B, then the entire top 40, if everybody's doing that, the entire top 40 is going to be made up of only R&B songs.
That's it. Yeah, it's not like in the old days you used to get like, you get like your R&B, but then you get things, I mean, going back to when I was a kid, then you get like the Birdie song will be dropped in there as well. Phenomenally popular. I mean, I don't know now if that would even dent it, but it
not these days of playlists.
No, exactly. But it was a real mixed bag back then. And I don't think.
But I have a theory
Go.
about pop music, and my theory is that pop music was the thing that young people did between, let's say, 1960 and 2000. And before 1960, the thing that young people did was go to the cinema. So in the 1940s and 50s, going to the pictures and having trading cards with actors and actresses on was the thing that became pop music. And then so the thing that young people did then was bought records and, had trading cards with pop stars on or posters with pop stars on. And I think that peaked in the sort of 1980s maybe, and then in the 1990s it kind of tailed off, and then I think it's become video games now. And I think so these days, I think one of the reasons why the pop charts aren't relevant anymore is because people just stick on a playlist and have it playing in the background. It's not about going out and buying and finding records anymore. It's about playing on the game or flicking through stuff on TikTok or whatever, I think we've diversified and moved on from pop music again. So I mean, pop music still has its place. Obviously, I'm not saying it doesn't. Just like cinema still has its place, but cinema is not what it was in the 40s and 50s when it was about the only thing you could go out.
Yes, that's right.
Do.
Yeah.
So yeah, in the 1940s, the only thing you could go out and do was go to the pictures. Pretty much. Obviously, I'm exaggerating again. But yeah, so pop music still has its place, but it is not as important to young people now as it was back when we were young. And so I think people our age have got to get over themselves a bit when it comes to sort of the way they think about this stuff, because we still like to think that pop music's the most important thing in the world in the sort of cultural zeitgeist, and it just ain't.
No, it's not. It really isn't. It really isn't. I think the same thing applies to sort of television viewing figures as well, because I mean the whole television landscape is changed forever. Now there is no going back to, I mean, obviously I think we mentioned last week and you just said like the 3 channels, and it used to get huge overnight. So you're talking sort of, you know, I mean, some of 10 to 18 million for one program. Never going to get that anymore unless it's a real big event like, you know, like the most recent memory has been like the Queen's funeral, for argument's sake.
Well, the Queen's funeral itself was like 12 million, I think.
Yeah.
Right, and the coronation, back when nobody had televisions, was 30 million.
Yeah, and people buying
that was
televisions.
When nobody had a television.
I know, and they were buying TVs just to watch that, weren't they? You know, that's the.
I mean, I don't know if that's the right figure, but do you know what I mean?
But no, it was off the scale compared to now, anyway. But yeah, it's completely changed now. So I think people sort of look at sort of like, again, we're going way off tangent here about sort of podcast figures, but it's the same kind of thing, because, you know, we've seen our figures sort of decline because it's become maybe a bit more focused, or maybe the way that people listen to stuff now has changed as well, because it used to be downloads, maybe they just stream it as well. I'm not sure if they pick up on streaming figures as well as, because I think really I think it's just purely on download. Is it just pure on downloads, or is it?
No. If somebody streams it, they have to access the. If somebody streams it, they have to access the original file in order to stream it, so it gets counted. So it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think it did myself. I thought, how does this work? But I looked into it and I realised that every time anybody accesses it, it does count.
Yeah. Okay.
I think
that's good.
So.
Now, so obviously, what I was looking at audio stuff, and like you, we both branched out into the world of YouTube. Now,
right, just before you move on to YouTube, one last point on the sort of figures and sort of
yeah.
Because back in the day, I'm not sure we mentioned this last week in specific terms of this, but back then you watched something when it was on, you listened to something when it was on, you bought something when it was out. You could only buy a single when it was in the shops. You know, if you liked, I don't know, Adam and the Ants ant music, and it was like out 6 months ago, it wasn't in the shops anymore, so you couldn't get it anymore. These days, you can get everything all the time, anywhere you go.
Yeah.
And that's made a huge difference too, because the, you know, viewing figures on the telly might be a bit of a bump, in the zeitgeist when there's a new episode of Doctor Who on, and lots of people might rush over and watch the new episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
But every episode of Doctor Who that's ever been made that still exists is available somewhere. And so the number of, just the sheer statistic of that means the number of people who are available to watch the new stuff as it comes out is collapsed.
Yeah.
So, and that's the same with podcasts. And so, sorry, to move on.
Well, no, actually, it's funny as you say that content is just sitting there somewhere waiting to be accessed. And on the occasion when I do look at sort of like download figures on Libsyn, I'll see a spike, because we've got now around about, including sort of the stuff we branched off into doing as well. So say about 450 episodes we've got online.
Yeah.
And I know when we've got a new listener, because it will spike up to 400, because that's a new listener, and they've downloaded all our content in one fell swoop.
Yeah, although that's divided, because Apple iTunes does this thing every now and again where it sort of glitches and re-downloads the entire back catalogue for somebody. But you know when that's happened and when it hasn't happened, because if that happens, then it's every episode. back as far as because iTunes will only carry 300 episodes, so it cuts off at 300 episodes ago, and there's no downloads at all for the first 150. So if you've got a day's downloads that exactly corresponds with one download for each of your last 300 episodes, then that's an iTunes glitch. It doesn't happen very often, but I have noticed that it does happen. So occasionally there'll be that, but yeah, generally speaking, yeah, it happens with us. Actually, weirdly, this last fortnight we've put out an episode every single day.
Yes,
because it was the Oscars, and we didn't mean to. We weren't planning to, but we started reviewing the films, and then once we'd started reviewing the films, we thought, well, we'd better carry on and review all the films if we can. And of course, we were so short on time, we had to do a review every single day in order to try and get them in, and we still failed by 2.
Oh no!
Partly because of the Gary Lineker thing, so we did a podcast on that.
Yes,
so
you did, exactly. Yeah.
But actually, the weird thing about that is it's so odd. So a podcast every day, and so our numbers have gone down per episode because people just haven't been downloading and listening to everything. And besides, if you've not seen the film, why would you download and listen to the podcast, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So the numbers have gone down for each of the individual podcasts, but actually the daily number has gone up because we've been doing this thing. People have found our feed and have gone back through the back catalogue, and actually a load of people have been downloading a load of our back catalogue. So swings and roundabouts.
It is. It really is. It really is. Yeah, because I always say we've obviously I was sort of looking at sort of what we've done audio only wise, and I decided right, I'm going to do something on YouTube as you've done as well. So obviously, I think trying to get yourself on YouTube is very much a dark art, really, and I've yet to figure it out. I really have. But what was your coming to my reasons for getting onto YouTube? What was your reasons for? Was it just another platform just to put it out there, or to do something different, or?
No, I don't think it was. Or I think it was back when we first started The Strangers. So this goes back a few years actually. I think it was back when we first started the Strangers feed.
Yeah.
And because we'd lost all our listeners from Starburst and we were trying to find them again, I think we did a thing on, I think our first one wasn't actually YouTube at all. I think it was Facebook Live. You could do a thing called Facebook Live.
You
did, still can. I think awful. The sound went out of sync and it stayed out of sync. And of course we didn't know because we were doing it. We couldn't hear it at the other end. So it was awful. Yeah. But I think the reason we did it was because there was a bit of news or something to talk about. And we thought, well, if we do it as Facebook Live, then that might help people find us because people might be talking to us and that might generate sort of like conversation or whatever. And I don't think it really made a huge amount of difference. But once you dip your toe in the water, you kind of think, oh, well, we should do that again. And so we've not done it regularly. We don't do it as a thing, but just every now and again we say, oh, should we put this one out on video as well as audio?
Yeah. No, I think for me, it was really the YouTube stuff is really a solo project. It's got nothing to do with Paul or anything else, or on the
because yours separate the audio from the video, don't you? Ours is just literally we do the same podcast, but we record ourselves doing it on video and put it out.
Yeah, I mean, this is the only occasion where I say the only occasion where it's the same, because I'll come on to what I'm doing sort of in recent weeks anyway. But originally, what I was doing, it was just Doctor Who content, and I did that for a number of years. But it was normally stuff that I wouldn't really talk about on the audio show, really, because I did things on sort of like on Doctor Who toys, but I think it's a better medium because you can show pictures or I'll come onto the minefield of using copyrighted content in a moment. But I think that was the biggest sort of drawback for me, was the copyrighted stuff. But I think I just felt I wanted to do something different, and it was the way I approached it as well, because I use green screen when I'm doing those podcasts. Right. So I bought like light boxes so I could light it properly. But you do need a hell of a lot of room to do that. Now, I think I looked at loads of different instructional videos on how to do this. And it's all done so. Yeah, you get the angle of the light. Then you've got to put a backlight in as well. Then you've got a main light on the main person. So what you're doing, you're lighting the screen, you're lighting the person, but you're also lighting from behind to stop that that green screen outline. You know, the Ready Brek halo you get round. I'm showing my age now. Ready Brek halo. So, but you need an awful lot of room to do that. I think your dog agrees with me. So it's so so I'm only doing it in a tiny room, and you couldn't really get the effect. So what I'm doing now, I sort of gave up on it for a bit because I thought it was a lot of work, a lot of setting up and getting the angle of the lights right, and then you do it, then you think, oh, that looks bloody awful, so you go back and do it again. And being a bit of a perfectionist, so it used to take me hours to do like 5 or 10 minutes worth of content. And I thought, and it's sort of, well, is it really worth all this hassle, really? So now I used to set up a proper video camera and everything. I say it's like a little Sony cam thing, handy cam. But I thought, okay, it's come on again. All that's evolved. So now all you need is your laptop or like a little clip-on camera, and one of those little light rings. That's all you need. And funnily enough, how I came about this moment of like an epiphany, really. I was watching something on telly, and they did a bit about people making a living on OnlyFans. Right? I can thank OnlyFans for this, right? Because all they do, all these people they use their phone and a little sort of like LED light ring which they power off their laptop or power it off their phone or whatever. And that's it. That's all they do. And I thought, right, well, if I can do that to sufficiently light a green screen behind me without casting shadows and everything. So that's what I did. So I bought this little 20 quid light ring thing. I now only use the built-in camera on my MacBook, and that's it. And I get the same results. And it takes me about 5 minutes to sort of set it all up and 5 minutes to put it away again. You know, so yeah, so I've so thank you, OnlyFans. There's no way I don't only content on this podcast, but thank you. But also,
I don't want to know about you and OnlyFans.
It wasn't a documentary about OnlyFans. I just watched it. And it just happened to. I'll make that perfectly clear. I was not watching a documentary about OnlyFans. But anyway, but I think right from the off, I thought, well, if I'm going to do this talking to camera, I think I've got to use a script, because just trying to waffle for X amount of time, I cannot do. There'd be too many ums and ahs and so on and so on. So yeah, I've actually had there's other ways you can do it. You can, because really, to use an auto cue, it's set underneath the lens and it's reflected back. So you're looking directly into the lens and looking at the script scrolling past, which I just didn't have the room to set all that up, really. So all I did, I've got an auto cue app for my iPad. I set up. I think just below the lens. So I'm not looking directly into it, but it's just below. So it kind of works. I think it's okay. I think it kind of works, but I think I'm making a hell of a lot of work for myself at the same time, because I'm writing a script and then trying to read. If I fluff it, if I read it, I've got to start again or pick up from a certain point. So that I spend a lot of time writing, and that whether it works or not, I don't know. I'm not a script writer. It's just a bit of fun, really. I wouldn't do it as a living.
You have to be doing it for yourself, really, right? You
do. I think that's the important thing, really. But I was, even back in the early days, I was doing I thought, right, I want to do like spoofy kind of things as well. So I did a character. I dreamt it's meant to be like an old. Do you know what? I got the idea. It stuck in my mind. It was an old episode of Wogan. Remember, you said his nightly chat show, and he had Mickey Rooney on there telling all these stories, and he started talking about Jimmy Tarbuck. Now, what stuck in my mind? Yeah, why was Mickey Rooney talking about Jimmy Tarbuck? But what he came up was so insincere, right? I thought that I latched onto this idea because he said Jimmy Tarbuck had just lost, or the Live at Her Majesty's that was on every Sunday night, and back in the day, had just been cancelled. Right. And Mickey Rooney, for some reason, had to say he came up with, Oh, and he just lost his show. Terrible news from terrible. And it would come across so insincere.
Right.
And I've seen so many other actors being insincere about other people losing their shows or whatever.
Wow.
I thought, right, I thought that sort of sowed the seed, a little germ of an idea there. So I thought I'd come up with this character who was incredibly bitter about other people's success or telling horrible stories, behind the scenes stories. It's all made up, but set in the world of Doctor Who. But of course,
Right.
This guy, he was a monster actor. He spent all his career in a costume. So that was the idea behind it. The first one I did went on for 25 minutes. I wrote this script, went on for 25 minutes.
Wow. Too long.
Too long. But the thing was, though, it became one of my most popular videos at the time. But one thing that really scared me, somebody created a fan account on Twitter.
Wow.
Yeah, which I found really, really strange. But I thought, okay, I went along with it for a little bit, and I started in character a Twitter account. And what I found really weird, I don't know if this person, I'm going to name him, Toby Haydoke, started following this account. Maybe thinking, what was he? Someone who was involved with Doctor Who back in the 1960s? I don't know, but yeah, that I quickly lost interest. Keeping that pretense up was a bit too much. I'll make a
these kind of things, they're fun for a little bit, but not for too long.
It went on for exactly. So, but I do the occasional sort of thing like that. But I just got more into just sort of like talking about a particular thing that happened in the Doctor Who news and run with it. But what I liked to use was clips or maybe a bit of music to illustrate something as I'm doing a bit of a voiceover on something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I've not managed to crack the fair because I've stopped using content other than like pictures or whatever on YouTube because apparently there's a fair use policy on YouTube. And apparently if you use less than, I think it used to be less than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But what I found that doesn't apply.
Yeah, I don't know if that's right. If it's for illustrate, there's particular occasions when it's, and I would imagine that, there are so many people uploading stuff to YouTube that maybe that's something because you're talking about algorithms as opposed to, people looking at individial cases and actually having a human being looking at it. So the algorithm's just going to wipe everybody out, aren't they?
Yeah, precisely. I think that's the because then it got down to sort of like 20 seconds, and then no, that wasn't that. Then you get a copyright strike on that. Then I thought I'll give up. It's not worth the hassle. It really isn't. But as you say, you see people blatantly uploading content that doesn't belong to them, or if it's those sort of reaction videos.
I don't know how it works.
I don't know how it works either because they're using long clips of sort of Disney content. It's sort of like Star Wars or Marvel or whatever it is, and they'll have it playing in the bottom or the corner of the screen or whatever, and then they might blur it out, and that seems to work for them. I tried doing that. No, copyright strike. And I cannot figure out how the hell they're sitting there.
There must be ways around it.
There's got to be, and I don't know if it's a graphical thing or not, where you are on the globe, whether that sort of
I don't know.
No idea.
All we've ever uploaded is just us chatting. So no music, no video, no nothing. Makes no odds.
No, precisely. And I think that's the point I've reached now. I thought, well, to hell with this. It's just going to be, okay, I will drop in screen grabs or pictures, whatever I'm talking about. But that's as far as it goes now. I steer clear of music. I'll stick clear of using any sort of video content, just in case it's... Yeah, go on.
But changing the subject slightly, but staying with video.
Yeah.
So do you get... What's your ratio of audio to video? Because obviously we put out the same podcast on both formats, and obviously there'll be some people who watch some of the video and then download the audio, so that number gets recorded twice, but you don't know how much they've watched or how much they've listened to.
No.
Because they might have switched from one to the other. But generally speaking, our video probably does about half as well as our audio, maybe, or about a third as well. So people aren't as interested in watching at all, are they?
No, they're not. I mean.
But then going back to what I said before, people have a limited time to watch.
Oh, they do, and I think that's why now, because I've sort of further down that diversification route now. I'm not solely talking about Doctor Who now on the YouTube channel or
we're gonna have
on
to
our
go
audio.
Into a part 3 now, aren't we?
We are, aren't we? We really are. Because I've gone into different sort of things now. So whether it's movies or TV, and at the moment it's predominantly sort of Star Wars stuff, because that's what I'm watching. I'm really going to talk about stuff that I'm watching, really, rather than saying, okay, this show is on, everyone's talking about it. Well, if I watch it, I'll probably say I hate it every week, because I don't want to do that. I don't want to be sitting there sort of being negative about a show all the time, because I think that's a very easy path to go down as well. And I thought, I do look at stuff or listen to stuff. Thought, why are you bothering with this program? You clearly hate it. Why do you waste your time, hating something and talk about something you like?
Hate watching get lots of downloads, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it does, unfortunately. Yeah. But what I used to do the videos used to go up on YouTube, and I also put those. I thought, what the hell? I'll put them onto our RSS feed as well. So it was a mixture of audio and video on there. And again, that comes back to what I was saying about us hitting the video charts on iTunes for a while. But now I do audio versions of the video stuff as well. So I will re-record, not kind of re-record it to a certain degree. But I think on the audio side of things, I can drop in audio clips. So you don't seem to get noticed that much. I think in the early days we were really worried about using
clips. They don't seem to pick it up.
They don't, do they? But we're worried about saying stuff that might get us into trouble, or using clips that might get us into trouble. Nobody cares, really, do they?
Well, how are they going to listen through every podcast that ever gets put on the system, right?
It's not going to happen, is it?
So on the Desert Planet Picks, sometimes I put up, I used to say, on Desert Planet Picks, I play out with up to 30 seconds of a song. And then one day I just put the whole song on at the end. Nothing happened. So since then, I sometimes so if I feel like it, I'll just put the whole song.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we do now as well. Nobody cares. It's, but I think that's the thing. You can sort of tie yourself up into. Well, I certainly did in the early days, tie myself up into knots over it about what we should and shouldn't be doing, or couldn't do. Nobody cares.
Yeah. Not really.
No.
Right, exactly. We are definitely going to go to a part 3.
Part 3, aren't we? Because we've more or less hit the hour mark now, haven't we?
Yeah, and we do want to talk about sort of why we don't just talk about Doctor Who anymore, and I think that's a conversation in itself. So let's have that conversation next time. But let's finish off with those figures that we started the episode with.
Yes, top and tail the episode with this. Yep.
So the rest of these figures on this website, which is called the podcast host, in case anybody wants to go and look, it says, so this is about where you thought you were, probably even lower than you thought. It says if you have more than 105 downloads in the first 7 days, that puts you in the top 25% of podcasts. So, and again, I'm talking about a pyramid here, aren't I? So the top 1% is at the top of the pyramid, and the sort of bottom 50% is this sort of mass of podcasts at the bottom. But if you have more than, so this is when the numbers start bumping up as you get higher up the list. To be in the top 10% of podcasts as of January 2023, more than 405 downloads in the first 7 days. So that's way above where we are.
Yeah.
But we're sort of comfortably in the top 25%, which is pretty good. So we're both in the top 25%.
Yeah.
That's not bad at all. Yes. In order to get in the top, right, so I think this is quite interesting now. In order to get in the top 5% of podcasts, so all the people in the world listening to podcasts, there's a certain amount that more people listen to than not, right? I guess. or, you know, the really popular ones. And the top 5% of podcasts are going to be the really popular ones, right? But in order to get into the top 5% of podcasts globally, you need to hit 975 downloads on a planet of 8 billion people.
Yeah.
Less than 1,000 people, fewer than 1,000 people need to download your podcast to put you in the top 5%, and the top 1% on a planet of 8 billion people to be in the top 1% of podcasts, which is this enormous thing now, massive thing globally, listening to podcasts, 4,588. So not even 5,000 downloads in your top first week, and you're in the top 1% of podcasts.
I think
that's insane.
It is
I've
insane.
Got to say,
that
really.
is. Yeah. When you think you think I need millions to get into that top 1%, to be top of that pyramid, and it's less than 5,000 globally.
Yeah. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, that is.
So actually, if you're podcasting and you're getting like 50 downloads a week, you're doing pretty all right, really.
Yeah, crack on. Yeah.
Exactly. If anybody's listening to you at all, there are so many podcasts. If anybody's listening to you at all, you're doing well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think on that note, it's a good time to wrap up. So Jay and I will be back in part 3 of this discussion. I can't believe we've managed to get 3 parts out of this. This is
We're talking about podcasting. So
I know.
We could probably do this every fortnight for a year.
I don't know if the listeners and viewers will put up with that, Jay. I'm not sure, but we would. We could do it, but yeah, whether they're listening.
Certainly another episode.
Certainly.
We talk about why we don't just talk about Doctor Who.
Yes, there we are. So until next time, everybody, say goodbye, JR.
Bye-bye, JR.
And bye-bye from me, Phil. Bye-bye.
Bye.